Rabbi Martin suggested that we talk about the difficult subject of happiness in a difficult world, in a dangerous world. So that's a very challenging subject. I would like to present this to you with a context. And the context is a question. And the question is, why is the mitzvah of Shabbat rest, that's menucha, and the mitzvah of Yom Tov is Simcha? To approach the question of joy, let's ask the question that way. We have a mitzvah of rest on Shabbos. There's no mitzvah of rejoicing on Shabbos. There's no mitzvah of Simcha on Shabbos. There are mentions of Simcha and joy on Shabbos, and it's appropriate, but it's not the work of Shabbat. The work of Shabbos is menucha, is resting. There's a thing called oneg, which means delicious enjoyment and pleasure on Shabbos. But Simcha as such is not a mitzvah. On a Yom Tov, on a festival, the mitzvah is v'samachta b'chagecha, to rejoice on a festival. We also rest on a festival, like on Shabbos to some extent, but that's not the focus of the day. So I'd like to understand what accounts for this tension between Shabbos and festivals, which really form a spectrum or continuum. And I think in understanding that question, hopefully we will understand many things, and also along the way the central work of what Simcha is altogether. Let's discuss first the question of Shabbos and why the central work of Shabbos is rest, and then we'll ask the question about Yom Tov and Simcha, and I hope a picture will emerge. Let's ask a few questions about Shabbos. So one question about Shabbat is that we are defining people who are authentically observant, people who live their Judaism, religious people. We call such people Shomrei Shabbos. A person who's religious, we call a Shomrei Shabbos. And the mystery is, we never name things inaccurately in Judaism. Why do we call people who are observant people who observe Shabbos? There are hundreds of other commandments. I might have targeted Emunah maybe, or you could think of other things. Why does Shabbos define you as a Jew? That's a central question. The second question is, why do we need it every week? The fundamental message that we have, or the fundamental messages that we need to absorb throughout Jewish life, once a year is good enough. What's more important than becoming the Jewish people? So once a year we go through a very intense educational experience called Pesach, where we impress that on the children in a very dramatic fashion, and once a year is evidently good enough. What's more important to our identity than Torah? And once a year we celebrate receiving of the Torah. What's more important than assessing who you are in depth and doing tshuva and cleaning up your act and becoming? Once a year we do that. What is so utterly different about Shabbos that you cannot live more than 6 days without re-experiencing Shabbos? Evidently it is much more fundamental than anything else, and the question is why? Related to that is the question of why Shabbos is a life and death question. The punishments for breaking Shabbos really go into the category of life and death. That's not true of a festival. Why? What is so bad about writing your name? Or breaking Shabbos, which you do with a very small technical act? Why is it a life and death question? A question related to that is, why do you keep Shabbos by not doing anything? The essential work of Shabbos is just not to do anything. Not to do anything creative. We're not talking about working. That's a bad misunderstanding. On Shabbos you can exert yourself and labor. May not be appropriate, but it's not forbidden. But on Shabbos you cannot create. Why? How do you build that temple in time, which is called Shabbos, by not doing things? Not doing creative activities. We have dimension of space and time. There are three dimensions to the world: space, time, and the soul, which is neither space nor time. In space, there's a temple called the Bet HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash, and that is built as a building. And in time, it's called Shabbos. That's a temple in time. You don't build temples by not doing anything. Build the Beis HaMikdash takes work. And Shabbos you do by not doing any work. What does that mean? Technically speaking, you could sleep all day on Shabbos and you'd be observing Shabbos. There are better ways to do it. But technically speaking, if you didn't do anything, you'd be observing Shabbos. Why is this holiness built? By simply not doing anything. Another question, why is Shabbos prohibited to non-Jews? You know that non-Jews are allowed to fulfill any mitzvah in the Torah. They can sit in a sukkah. In fact, the non-Jewish soul has a special relationship with the sukkah. They can take a lulav. They can do any mitzvah they want and get reward. There are two mitzvahs they may not do. Very serious prohibitions. One is keep Shabbos, and the other is learn Torah. By the way, you see from this that Shabbat and Torah have a very close connection. And there are many other connections between them. But the first question is, why are non-Jews not allowed to keep Shabbos? I'm not talking about have a weekend and a break. That's good. I'm talking about observe Shabbos spiritually by desisting from creativity. And similarly, why are not allowed to learn Torah? By the way, Shabbos and Torah have many deep connections. For example, the Zohar says that a person who's learned in Torah is called Shabbos. What does that mean? But one of the obvious connections is that non-Jews have these two unique prohibitions, which is Torah and Shabbos, and the question is why. Another question, maybe a bit more sophisticated, is that the word Shabbos means to sit. It has a number of meanings. It means to return. It has many overtones. But the root meaning of the word Shabbat is to sit, and the Torah makes that explicit. The Torah says, Shvu ish tachtav. That means there's a mitzvah to sit in place. In fact, if you're traveling on Shabbos and the sun goes down Friday afternoon, you cannot move at all. You cannot move outside a very small radius. So Shabbos means to sit in place. And the problem is that sitting is always sad. Sitting is always tragic. The Maharal explains that sitting is a tragic position because it's a position of non-movement. The whole point of life is to moving and growing. In fact, what's really weird about Judaism is that Jewish law is called halakha. That's a very weird name for a body of law. It means walking. But the whole point of observing Judaism is that it's a journey. And therefore, sitting is a position of sadness. And that's why mourning no aleinu is done sitting. We talk about sitting Shiva. The reason we sit in mourning, by the way, is because the mitzvah of mourning is to act in empathy with the soul that's no longer in the world. You know, it's very important to understand this. People think that mourning is psychologically healthy. Taking leave and coming to terms, those are all fringe issues. The Kabbalistic essence of mourning is that you behave like the soul that's left the world, and thereby you carry it on a journey. This is a parent who carried you, now they've died. The way you carry them is by acting in empathy, building that bond with the soul. So they cannot move, you sit. They cannot be presented in the world, your clothes are torn. They cannot walk, you have no shoes. They're silent, you sit silently. So acting in empathy with the soul that has died essentially is the position of sitting. Every position of the body has a spiritual significance. So sitting is intrinsically sad. And therefore the question is, Shabbos, which should be a day of great joy, why is it named for an activity and a position of stagnation, which is a dead position? If you have a sensitive ear, you will also be led to ask the question of why is a place of Torah study called a yeshiva? That means a place where you sit. That is very strange. You know, again, we never name things inaccurately. For hundreds of years, the Jewish people have referred to a place of Torah study as a yeshiva, a place where you sit. That is very strange. First of all, it's irrelevant if you sit or stand. The Gemara says in the old days when they learned Torah, they used to stand out of respect. Today we sit because we're weak. But whether you sit or stand when you're learning, you can stand on your head. The position in which you learn is irrelevant. So why would we name a yeshiva for the position of sitting when first of all it's irrelevant and second of all it's sad? There's no ecstasy like learning Torah. Call it a Beis HaMedrash, a lot of things you could call it. You call it a yeshiva, you choose a name that's irrelevant to the activity and means sadness. By the way, you hear again here a connection between Torah and Shabbos. They're both designated as sitting activities. And there are many other questions we could ask about Shabbos as well, but let those set the tone. And the answer is this. You know, many people think that Shabbos, Jewish people, it's been central in Jewish existence because it's a fantastic social institution, family time, downtime. That's not essence. That's very important, by the way. If you work in Jewish outreach, which I'm sure you all do, how do you present Judaism to people who are new? How do you present to them the idea of Shabbos? It is very important to explain to people that it is a fantastic social and psychological institution, even without religion, even if you don't believe in God. Shabbos is a fantastic idea, especially in today's frenetic society where people are addicted, they're in the tyranny of gadgets, and there's young people today cannot resist texting on Shabbos. Nominally Shabbos observant. There's young people today that switch off their phones at night. That means it's buzzing through the night. They can't detach from it. Shabbos is a fantastic opportunity simply to detach. Let me embarrass you. Raise your hand, please, if you live in a family that has dinner together, the whole family, every night. I was raised in a world where nobody ate dinner together until the whole family was home. Maybe not lunch, maybe not breakfast, the evening meal. Nobody ate the meal till everybody was home. Today, it's very uncommon. People pass like ships in the night. In England, recently, I asked a group of 100 businessmen, how many of you eat with your whole family every night? One hand went up. And it's a guy who lives alone with his wife. If he doesn't wait for her, he doesn't get supper. You know. Shabbos is a fantastic marriage opportunity. You can look into your wife's eyes over the candles and recall her name, you know, before you fall asleep with your nose in the soup. There's no question it's valuable as that, but that's fringe benefits. That's fantastic and it's essential. But there's something much deeper than that. And here's the depth. I just wrote a book about this, by the way. That's called Shabbat and the Festivals, Journey and Destination. And there you'll find this summarized, and that's an essential book you absolutely need. You need 2 copies, actually, if you really want to understand it deeply. The thing is this, that every journey is given meaning by its destination. Here's the depth. Every process is given meaning by its result, its endpoint. Any journey, any process, anything that moves through stages the whole journey has meaning only in terms of the destination. A journey that's going nowhere is ridiculous. It's true that the Buddhists teach that the journey is the destination. Okay, that's a deep idea, but there's a destination. A journey with no destination is a contradiction in terms. A process with no endpoint is ridiculous. Imagine you visit a famous inventor, and on his workbench you see a very complicated looking machine. You say, this looks amazing, what does it do? He says, this is a breakthrough in human technology. For the first time in human history, I've been able to build a machine that does this. You say, what does it do? He says, you switch this machine on, it keeps itself going, it cleans itself. If it breaks, it fixes itself, it fuels itself, and it keeps going. You say, that's amazing. What does it actually do? It says, this machine keeps itself going. You say, I know, but what does it do? He says, no, you don't get the point. The man's an idiot. He's a brilliant idiot, but he's an idiot. If the machine does all that and makes you a pizza, it's a clever machine. If that machine makes you a coffee, as well as all that stuff, but if the machine does nothing other than keep the machine going, that's ridiculous. And the truth is, most people on earth live that way today. Most people keep going to work, to keep surviving, to keep going to work, to keep surviving. For what? For a few days at the end of the year when you collapse unconscious on a beach someplace, so you can do it again. And if you ask them why they're doing this, they tell you, well, eventually I'll have enough. Believe me, by then your arthritis will be so bad, you won't be able to chase what you thought you'd be chasing. There has to be an endpoint. There's got to be a destination. The process to lead to something. And here's the secret. Shabbos isn't just a healthy psychological institution. Shabbat is destination. And that's why it gives meaning to the week. You know, we have an idea that everything we experience here is projected from a higher world. Every halachic principle, every human experience, everything we go through here is projected from a higher world. In the higher world, we understand that life is a journey to a destination. We call it this world. In Torah terminology, it's called Eretz. Eretz means running. In English, these words are useless, right? Heaven and earth. But in Hebrew, they mean something. In Hebrew, Eretz means running towards. And Shamayim means destination. Kol Hashamim. The word Shamayim, the root is Sham. Like the root of the word Neshama, or the word Shem, which means the definition of essence. So we talk about Eretz and Shamayim. This world is a journey, and the next world is destination. And the most important thing by far to understand about life is that the next world is formed only by the journey. And not some place you go which is, a funfair. Or our concept of the world to come is only what the journey has produced. The terminology in the Zohar, all these clumsy words are put together in 4 words in the Zohar. The Zohar says when you get to the next world, Tam ha'etz k'tam ha'pri. The taste of the tree is the taste of the fruit. What does that mean? In this world, a tree is a long process, and eventually it brings out a fruit, which is delicious. In the next world, you'll be able to walk up to the tree and eat the fruit or the tree. But then you'll realize that the journey is the destination. The next world is nothing other than this world repeated in terms of essence, in terms of what you have become, the result of the journey. The concept, the deep concept of what we call Olam Haba, the world to come, is that it is simply the essence of self, stripped of all facade and illusion and raw material, the result of what has been produced. Shabbos is the result of the week. The concept of Shabbos is getting to a place where nothing exists there other than what has been constructed during the week. Shabbos is called Me'ein Olam Haba. It is a little premonition of what the next world will feel like. When the sun goes down, you enter Shabbos, you should feel a little bit like you will feel when you leave the world. And in that dimension, you will not be able to construct anything. The reason on Shabbos you cannot create anything new is because you're living in a microcosm, a premonition of another world in which you will not be able to construct. This world is for construction. The next world is simply for relishing the product. We practice that every week. There's an amazing, really amazing source called the Gvul Ben Yamin. He was one of the students of the Rabbi. You're going back 500 years. Listen to what he says. You should look it up yourself. It's an astounding text. He says, bringing from his teacher, the Ramak, that when Hashem created the world, he created 6 days. And each of the 6 days comprised 28 hours. Why? Because we know there are 28 elements of time. How do we know that? Because in Kohelet it says, Es lirkois, at least there's a time to mourn, a time to rejoice, a time to live, a time to die. There are 28 of those. So we know that there are 28 elements of time, and therefore every day of the week comprised 28 hours. When Shabbos came, each day gave 1/7 of its essence, 4 of its hours, namely the 4 hours of essence of product of that day, to Shabbos. And each day was left 24 hours, and Shabbos was left to 24 hours, nothing other than the result of the days of the week. Shabbos is nothing other than what it receives from the week. That's why if you produce nothing during the week, Shabbos is tremendously depressing. If you're no different when you enter Shabbos than you were a week before, you failed. And it is so depressing. The Christians changed it to a Sunday. The Muslims changed it to a Friday. They couldn't handle it. Shabbos is only delicious if you prepare the food that you now eat. The concept of Shabbos is you can no longer produce. That's what we're doing. The reason we don't do anything on Shabbos is because you're practicing what it will feel like to get to a domain in which you can no longer produce. Let's answer the questions. Why are you defined as being a Shomer Shabbos? Because you're a person with a destination. There's nothing more important about a journey than the destination. Everything else is negotiable. First class, second class, the scenic route, the slow route, that's all negotiable. There's one thing that's never negotiable about a journey, and that's a destination. That you can never forget. If you run a business, and the point of the business is making money, you can never forget that. Even when you're spending money, it has to be to earn money. Otherwise, you're running the business irresponsible. So you call the Shomer Shabbos no other mitzvah because this defines you. Why do we need it every week? Everything else once a year is good enough, but you can never afford to forget that the journey goes to a destination and every step has to lead there. Why are non-Jews not allowed to keep Shabbos? Because the deal between, the partnership between Jews and non-Jews, the Yaakov-Esav partnership, not talking here about the Muslim world, talking about the Yaakov-Esav, the Jewish Western bloc. The deal is that they were twins, given a work to share. Esav was the older brother and more mighty, and he was given the work of perfecting the world, uplifting it, making it safe, and perfected and beautiful. For Yaakov to connect to spirituality, they would have shared the reward. They were twins. Esau was given the leading role because it takes more power. He failed, of course. We're not doing too well either these days. But that was the partnership between them. And therefore, the work of the non-Jew, Esau's work is to build the world and to create within the world and bring the world to perfection. And our work is to connect to another world. Our work is Shabbos, and his work is the week. When a non-Jew tries to keep Shabbos, he's desisting from his purpose. His purpose is to build the world. The point of Shabbos is to step out of the world and not create. And therefore he's giving up his reason for being. His work is to build the world. Ask any non-Jew on the street, what is the purpose of life? They'll say to make the world a better place. Right, that's correct. Why is a non-Jew not allowed to learn Torah? And what's the connection between Torah and Shabbos? There are only two things you will ever do in your life that are endpoint and not process. Everything you ever do is always for something else. Why do you study? To get the exam. Why do you want the exam? To get the degree. Why do you want the degree? To get the job. Why? It's endless. There are only two things in life you ever do that are done for themselves. One is called Shabbos, where you're not moving any place. The whole concept of Shabbos is just to be. It's totally in the moment. You shouldn't even think about what you're going to do after Shabbos. You're not even allowed to prepare for anything after Shabbos. That's a desecration of Shabbos. Shabbos is destination. Totally in the moment. So in mitzvahs it's called Shabbos, where you live the moment. And in Torah, it's called learning Torah Lishma. The mitzvah of learning, I'm talking about learning in order to know what to do. I'm talking about the ecstasy of simply learning to think how Hashem thinks. That's called learning Torah Lishma. The concept of learning Torah for its own sake is simply for the pleasure of learning. Not to know what to do, not for any other reason. Its total destination and the ecstasy of learning Torah is simply being in a place that goes no place else. You've arrived. Shabbos and Torah share that. A person learned it is called Shabbos. He's living in the dimension of endpoint. You know, there is a parallel to this concept in the non-Jewish mind. That means in the broader human mind, there is a parallel to endpoint. And that's what the world calls playing a game. If you think about it, when people play a game, I'm not talking about a game that you do to meet people or learn a skill. Games that people play just to enjoy themselves. Think about it for a moment. The joy of that sort of activity is because you're doing something that's not connected to anything else. What's the point of a game? It's doing an activity simply to enjoy that activity. That's why the more trivial and meaningless the game is, the better, more you enjoy it. You know what's amazing in Hebrew? The word for a game is sha'ashua. It's a very unusual word. There are not many words in Hebrew that are doubled roots, like gal. Sha'ashua means sha. Sha in Hebrew means turning towards, like the michas kain lo sha. Sha means to turn towards. Sha'ashua means turning towards the turning towards. That's what a game is. It's an activity you do simply to enjoy the activity. Talking rubbish, by the way, is very closely related. Why do people enjoy talking nonsense? And I hate to admit this, but men do it much worse than women. Much worse. When women speak nonsense to each other, a lot of useful information is usually being exchanged. Men talk garbage. Men can talk about sports statistics from years before that are completely irrelevant, and it's delicious. Why is it delicious? Because it's irrelevant. You're enjoying something that has no responsibility or connection to anything else. I'll just tell you a beautiful story. I have a friend, maybe some of you know, Michael Karp in Johannesburg. So one day he told me he saw his kids playing Monopoly. You know what Monopoly is. And Friday afternoon he's getting ready for shul. The kids are still playing Monopoly. So he walks over and he says, kids, look, you obviously don't understand how to play Monopoly. You can't play the same game all week. The way Monopoly works is you play till someone's bankrupt, they fall out. Then someone else, eventually someone wins, they have the Monopoly. They said, no, Abba, you don't understand. The way we play is when someone is bankrupt and fall out, the rest of us get together and we make a gemach. We lend him money and we carry on playing, right? See, the kids understand that they want to play. They don't want to win it. That is the concept of endpoint. So Shabbos, the mitzvah of Shabbos is menucha because it's coming to rest. That's the point. You don't move on Shabbos. Sitting is sad when you should be moving. But sitting is delicious when you arrive at destination. Of course you sit down there. Movement would be away. And that's why Shabbos and Torah are called sitting. Shabbat is sitting because you've reached destination. Of course you sit. And Torah, although you work extremely hard in the yeshiva, but it's a domain of endpoint. This is a sitting in the next world. What is a Yom Tov? What is a Chag? A Chag is not resting. A Chag is Simcha. So to understand that, let's ask a few questions about joy. What is Simcha? The first question is really whether Simcha is a mitzvah. And that's not so simple. There's no explicit mitzvah to rejoice, except maybe on a festival. But the Torah makes it absolutely clear that we say, mitzvah gedolah liyos v'simcha tamid. It's a great mitzvah to be happy always. First of all, how can you be happy always? What about sitting on the floor mourning for somebody who's died? What do you mean happy always? And evidently you are obliged to be happy always. In fact, it's well known, Chazal say, that in Adar, marbim b'simcha, and on Av, which is soon to come, mamatim, you minimize simcha. It doesn't say you increase sadness, you minimize joy. And that's a very strange proposition. Why should you always be in joy? There are very sad things in the world. Do we really mean that you should be happy even in life's tragedies? How would you do that? You know, raise your hand, please. If you don't know somebody personally suffering unspeakably, at least one person, maritally, psychologically, financially, medically, you don't know anybody? I'll show you a few. How many people like that you have to know before it affects your ability to be happy? So you tell me you'll forget about it. How does the non-Jewish world handle this? Detachment. They drink, engage in drugs, or put themselves into the world of entertainment so that they don't focus on the world. If they want to have a really good time, they go watch a horror movie. You know, I haven't been to a movie for, 40 years. But I see them all the time because I travel. You're sitting on the plane, there's 15 screens, each one's worse than the next. People being killed, cities wiped out, planets exploded, civilizations destroyed. They're eating their pretzels, having a wonderful day. Evidently, it pays to put yourself into that, to detach from your own reality. But Judaism is a process of superconscious awareness, not detachment. So how do you remain attached to the world? Well, you go out with some friends and have something to eat and drink and forget about the suffering. How insensitive is that? No, you'll go and have a giggle and a laugh and drink and eat while thinking about the suffering. It's even worse. How do we approach this? And again, how do you raise children in a world full of danger to be happy? There's a letter of the Chazon Ish, the great rabbinic personality, died in 1954. He answers somebody must have written to him with some personal difficulties. The rabbi makes a statement in his answer that is impossible to understand. Listen to his language. He says, makir et or ha'orot shel ha'emet. His language is very rich. But loosely translated, somebody understands what life's all about. Ein etzev ba'olam. There's no sadness in the world. What is he saying? The Chazon Ish lived through the European destruction. He's had the weight of Jewish suffering on his shoulders. He and his Rebbetzin were childless. What do you mean there's no sadness in the world? Our rabbis are not given to vague emotional exaggerations. Let a person say that. He forgot about the mitzvah sitting on the floor. It's debatable if you have to cry. But there's mourning. What do you mean there's no sadness in the world? What is he saying? And here's the answer. The answer is that simcha is nothing to do with detachment. Yes, that's good sometimes to detach and it may be healthy. The real definition of joy is the experience of the soul when it's doing what it needs to be doing. When you're moving correctly along a correct road to a correct destination, you will feel joy. Your face may not reflect that. Somebody watching you may see pain. But when you know you're achieving, when you're conquering, battling against resistance, and you're making progress, and you feel the progress taking place, you may be crying with pain. But there's a surge of inner joy that is very hard to put into words. You know, imagine you have to build something in the hot sun. You got to carry these rocks and logs, and it's very important what you're building, and you have a time limit. How do you feel when you see that the thing's taking shape and you'll be done in time? There's no question that there's a surge of joy. Your hands are bleeding. The onlooker would never guess. But the joy is when you see the thing taking shape, not despite the effort, because of it. When you exert effort and it's yielding progress, you feel the joy. I don't see too many convinced faces. Imagine you're a Martian. Martian, you come from Mars. You come down to this planet, you want to know what human beings are all about. So you hire an earthling to take you around human society. First place it takes you is LA Fitness. So you put your eye to the keyhole, you see a young fellow working on a machine, right? He's picking up weights, he's stretching, he's shaking with exertion, he's pouring with sweat, he's basically in early kidney failure. You would conclude that just out of your range of vision, is standing another human there with a submachine gun, forcing him into this torture. But when you step into that establishment, you'll see there's no one forcing him. He's paying for this experience, and he's loving every moment. Why? Why do you enjoy? And the pain of that exertion can be so pleasurable it can become addictive. Why? So let's analyze that. If you analyze the pleasure of pain, the pleasure you feel when you're pushing against resistance and undertaking a difficult and arduous and torturous journey, as you feel the journey progress, the reason you enjoy it is one reason only. It's only anticipation of destination. The reason the journey is pleasurable, it's given a delicious flavor by the anticipation. And you can prove that very easily. And by the way, in life, very often, arriving is a big disappointment. Very often, the anticipation is more pleasurable than arriving. But you can prove this very easily. You're building in the hot sun, and the thing's taking shape, and you're enjoying the project, and you suddenly become informed that one moment before completion it will be destroyed. What happens to your sense of pleasure? Pure pain. The reason you enjoy the work is because you're on this journey to this longed-for destination. And, the train is hot and bothersome and painful, and it's delicious as every mile brings you closer. And you suddenly realize you're on the wrong train. No more pleasure. The reason you feel pleasure in effort, when you invest in yourself totally, is because it's delivering a delicious destination. And here comes the weird thing. When you get to the destination, you know what makes it pleasurable? How much work you invested to get there. When you stand on that mountaintop, it's not the view. And put you there by helicopter, not the same thing. The Gemara says you'd rather have one thing you did yourself than 9 that you're given for free. It's what you risked and conquered to get there. So listen to this weird concept of life. We enjoy moving towards destination because we anticipate destination. And when we get to destination, we enjoy it in proportion to how hard the journey was. When you hold that beautiful thing in your hands that you spent an hour making, or a week, or a month of professional effort, whatever it is, or aesthetic effort, it's not the beauty of the thing you enjoy, it's how much of yourself is invested in it. So we need to ask, what is this reflecting from the higher world? What is it in the world of essence that we experience as pleasure when we're working, as we move towards destination, and then we enjoy destination in proportion to the journey? And the answer is life. Because what's our concept of life? Moving against painful difficulties and pushing against resistance to get to a destination that we call the world to come, which is nothing other than what the journey was. So when you invest an hour in building something that you really work hard for, or a month or a year, whatever it is, and you forget to eat and sleep, and it's delicious as you build it, and finally you relish, you're just experiencing a small microcosm of what life is. And therefore, Simcha, let's just for a moment just look at this on a higher plane. This is not normal, not for normal people, but at least to get the idea. How can a person sit on the floor mourning for somebody who's died and feel joy? The answer is you're doing work. You're carrying that neshama on a journey. Through the pain. When you sit and do that correctly, the Rambam rules, amazing. The Rambam writes that if you fail to mourn correctly for a relative, you're guilty of cruelty. Imagine that. The word he uses, akhzari, you are cruel. You could have carried that person on a journey and you didn't. So how does a person feel when they've done that? And they collapse exhausted and emotionally drained after a day of that. You feel all the pain and you feel the joy. I did what I had to do today. You have to be very, very mature for that. But that's the essence. When the Chazon said, Ein etzev boil, Ein etzev boil. Etzev means depression. Etzev means atzvut, depression. That's never allowed. You can feel the agony of life. You'd be abnormal if you didn't feel it. But depression, no place to go. The hopeless end. No situation should yield that. Again, just to look at this on a higher plane. Take people who've reached virtual perfection. Take the prophets. Look at Jeremiah. When Jeremiah wrote his book of agony, let alone Eicha, which is unspeakable, the commentaries tell us he was feeling joy. Why? Because a prophet cannot receive prophecy unless he's feeling serene. One of the Nevi'im was asked to prophesy by a king and he was distressed. He called for music. V'haya kanagain hamanagain, when the music, actually the deep translation is when the musician became the music. So when they wrote their books of tragedy, they must have been feeling serene. The Ralbag, one of the famous Spanish commentaries, 14th century, listen to what he says. He says, when Abraham was about to kill Yitzchak, he was feeling the Simcha Shel Mitzvah with the pain of the death of his child. How do we know? Nothing moves in Torah without a source. You can't make assertions like that. What's his source text? Because as Abraham was about to cut the throat of his son, he heard a voice calling out from the higher world to stop. And Navi cannot hear that voice if he's distressed. The Sfardim have the most beautiful piyut on Yom Kippur that we Ashkenazim don't have. Look in the Matzah of Yom Kippur. They have the most exquisite poem about Abraham about to kill Yitzchak. And one of the lines says, describing his emotions as he's about to kill his son, Ayin b'mar bocha, one eye crying with tears, v'lev sameach. You have to be an Avraham Avinu for that. You could be going through hell. But if the journey is progressing and you're doing what you have to be doing, you can feel joy. Take Yonah. Yonah's on a ship. It's breaking up. They're panicking. Everyone's going to drown. He's asleep. Next time you're 35,000 feet above the Atlantic and the wings start flapping, try to take a little nap. You take a nap. You say Shema. You do tshuva. He's asleep. They wake him up. Aren't you afraid? No, I'm a Jew. He crossed the ocean before. Goes back to sleep. What are you going on? Because a Navi is a baby in his mother's arms. She can be walking to a gas chamber. It makes no difference to him. I was very close to Rav Simcha Wasserman, one of the great rabbinic personalities of the last generation. I was privileged to be close to him, the son of Rabbi Wasserman. He was a man who lived a life of unmitigated tragedy. Again, he and his Rebbetzin were childless. The Russians tried to kill him in 1915 in both wars. His father was shot by the Germans. His mother, family's wife. A total tragic life. And he sparkled with joy. So once my brother-in-law, Dr. Bortz, some of you know him in Tulsa, he was a very close student of his. He was his doctor, and he was very close to him. He felt he could ask him a personal question. So with great trepidation, he once said to him, how does the Rav manage such joy? Always, you've lived a life of such tragedy. Rav Simcha looked at him with those amazing blue eyes, and he said, every situation in life that I find myself in, I ask what can be done. Whatever can be done, I do. Whatever cannot be done, I don't worry about. What do? We don't do what should be done, and we worry. But a person who knows what life's all about does what can be done. What's beyond that, not my problem. It's his problem. He knows what he's doing because you feel it, but not my problem. Personally, I've chosen to spend my life in Jewish education, Jewish outreach. That's what I chose. It's a total losing game. Complete losing game. For every person we bring in, dozens are lost. The calculation on the American scene is over the last 40 to 50 years, about 50,000 Americans have been brought into Jewish observance through outreach efforts. And more than 1 million have been lost. I would have liked to spend my life in a winning game. I mean, I did start life in another career, and it may be hard to believe, but I had academic promise. I probably could have achieved something. And I've chosen a field that is disaster. But the concept is, what's your job? If I'm a medic on the battlefield and my job is to take one more wounded soldier and stop his bleeding, that's what I'm doing. The fact that there's a war going on and we're shot to pieces, usually by our own people, that's his problem, not mine. I feel it, but it's not my job. And therefore, a person doing what they need to be doing, no matter what the circumstances, they can be easy, they can be horrific. If you're doing what you can and must be doing, within the pain, you'll feel the joy. Let's speak for a moment about depression. It's a big problem in our generation. I'm not talking about genetic and medical problems. I'm talking about life depression. What's the cause of depression? A life that's going nowhere. Simcha is the response to a life that is moving. When a life is not moving, the wheels are spinning and the weeks and months are going by, and no progress is being made, you will feel the opposite of life, which is the cold hand of death, which is called depression. And people who've been there will tell you it's the most painful thing imaginable. Simcha is the experience of life progressing. As every day goes, that will never come again. It's been translated into eternity. You willingly pay the day away. You're paying away the currency. You've bought the goods that live forever. But if nothing's being bought and nothing's happening and the time is going, what's the cure for depression? Get moving. You cannot be depressed when you're productive. You can be weeping in pain. You can be sobbing with effort. But you cannot be depressed when you're productive. Of course, when someone's depressed, you can't say to them, be happy. You say to them, be happy. They'll be suicidal. You get them moving. Take them for a run. Get them doing something for somebody else. You cannot be depressed when you're productive. So what have we studied this evening? We studied Shabbos. Shabbos is the concept of journey leading to destination, and Shabbos is destination. That's the most important thing. It's a life and death question. What is a festival? What is a Yom Tov? A Yom Tov is an experience of one step on the journey. Every festival, every Yom Tov, you stop the train and you get off at a station and you relish that step of the journey. A Yom Tov is called a Moed. Moed means it moves towards destination. Ya'ad means destination. The Torah calls them Moadim. And we call them Zmanim. Zman in Hebrew means Zimun. It means an invitation to something that is coming. The concept of a Chag is a journey. We call them Regalim. That means, what is the meaning of a pilgrim festival? It's a journey. Shabbos is not journey. Shabbos is destination. You sit. But on a Yom Tov, you don't sit. On a Yom Tov, you relish another step. What happens on Pesach is you relish the idea of becoming a Jewish people, being carved out to be that people that carry that Sefer Torah through the genocidal deserts of history to reach that cosmic destination. Take a breath away. You absorb that, which is ecstatic. And then you get back on the journey. A few weeks later, you receive the Torah. The concept is Shabbos is destination, and a Yom Tov is a station. Every Chag is a step on the journey. One element of Torah, one element of Jewish life is being absorbed and incorporated into the personality. And that's ecstatic. Rabbi Crescas, one of the great Spanish, again, going back to the 1300s, he has a famous opinion that we have very little free will. This is not tonight the time to discuss, but yeah, his opinion is we have very little free will. But I want to point out one thing. What's most astounding about his opinion is, he says when it comes to faith, you have no free will at all. He says you can't command people to believe. If I see an object that exists in a certain way, when I see it that way, then I believe it already. And if I don't see it that way, you couldn't force me to believe it if I tried. If I ask you what color this is, and you say white, well then of course you believe it's white. And you can't make an effort to believe it. And if I say, please believe it's black, you couldn't if you tried. He says the first of the 10 commandments is not a commandment. And that's why it doesn't say you shall, it just says I am. Hashem can't command you to believe. And it's a whole construction. He says, what's the reward for emunah? And he answers an amazing thing. He says that the concept of emunah, which is something you cannot choose, just to put it into the most extreme form, believing in God, believing in Hashem, he says it's something you don't have to choose. It's obvious. Examine the evidence and you'll see it. And when you see it that way, then of course you believe it. Just to understand what he's saying, imagine the generation that left Egypt. They experienced it directly. They definitely no mitzvah for them to believe. They saw it. So he asks, what was their mitzvah? I wonder if there was a mitzvah. Listen to what he says. It's astounding. He says you cannot choose what you believe. Because as soon as you analyze facts and you see them in a certain way, then of course you believe them that way. What you choose is your attitude. When you come to the conclusion that Hashem exists, and the Jewish people were singled out in a certain way, and we were given Torah and it's all true, that forces itself on you. But then you are free to choose your attitude. Do you choose an attitude of this is unbelievable? I was privileged to be part of a cosmic experience, living and bringing history to its fulfillment, and you think that is unspeakably ecstatic? Or do you say I'd rather be eating cheeseburgers? Do you choose ecstasy of involvement or do you choose apathy? That's up to you. And he says the reward, and he's talking about the Simcha of Pesach as it happens. He wrote an essay about that. He says the reward you get for the joy of a festival is the rejoicing you put into it, because that you choose. You can be bored with it and disinterested, or you can choose involvement and engagement. And that's an ecstasy, which is a choice. The Simcha means an expanded mind. Maral says that Simcha is 5, Chamisha. Simcha, Chamisha. Because 4 is always the constrained word. And 5 is already expanded. Anyone who knows Hebrew knows that 6, Shesh, is actually Sason as well, which is even higher. And 7 is Tzvi'ah, to be completely full. And Shmona is even beyond it, which is more than full. Shamen. Eventually get to Eser, which is Ashir, which is enough to give. But the journey begins with an expansion of consciousness, which is journey taking a step forward and you feel a larger person. That's the Simcha. And Shabbos is not that. Shabbos is simply the rest at endpoint, not the Simcha of a journey, but the joy of bringing it home. What is the difference between Sason and Simcha? That's a deeply Kabbalistic question. Say only that Sason is even higher. Sason is closer to Svi'ah, which is completion and satiety. That's a higher form. Being well-adjusted means seeing what you can do and doing it. Believe me, most of us did everything we could be doing. We'd be so busy and so fulfilled anyway. But obviously there's a pain in things that you cannot do. None of us can fix everything. We do our best. But a well-adjusted person will feel joy even in the dark times. Shabbos has 2 dimensions. The question is, what about the Shamor and the Zachor aspects of Shabbos? Yes. There is a constructive aspect of Shabbos too, which is building Kedusha, building sanctity. You make Kiddush. You prepare for it and you make Kiddush. So you're investing Kedusha, you're elevating that experience. So not just doing nothing, it's doing nothing, building a hallowed space. That is the injecting of sanctity into this temple that's being built indeed. But notice that the way you do that is not by constructive creative activity. That's desisting from that, which goes hand in hand with adding the Kedusha. So putting sanctity in, right? A child is conceived on Shabbos, let's say. That's not a malacha. That's very creative. So those activities, that's the technical creative activities that build the material world that you desist from. And putting in the spiritual is the creative action. Yeah. Shabbat is both the end of the first week and the beginning of the next week. Indeed, that's why it's a spiral. Each one consolidates and brings home everything that week was. And now you step down out of Shabbos into a spiral to another one that will be even higher, empowered. Again, when you make Havdalah, here's a deep answer to your question. When you make Havdalah, you take wine. Wine is always taken to connect the lower to the higher. Always, right? Wine, the Gaon of Vilna says that wine is 70 yain, which is the same as sod. That means the access to the deeper world. So, we're so used to it as Jews, we don't even notice it. But when there's a circumcision, a wedding, Shabbos, we're having a couple. What does wine got to do with this? The answer is that the whole material world always gets worse with time. The spiritual gets better with time. Maturity, judgment. Material things always get worse with time. The body, machines, everything in the physical except wine. It's the one substance that gets better with time. Because it's an avenue of access into the spiritual. It has a quality of the spiritual. So every time we're moving from the material to make sanctity, we take a cup of wine. Now the question, circumcision. You're taking the potentially most sordid and fallen aspect of human expression and you're making it holy. A marriage, which involves the material and the sensual, you're making that holy. We call it kiddushin. That's the theme. So why do you take wine at Havdalah? The concept is it's called the Yeridat Tzorech Aliyah. You're going down out of Shabbos to engage a week, using the power of what you brought home to reach a higher one next week. Indeed, so Shabbos is the end of the week and the beginning, yes. The question is this. If Shabbos and learning Torah are endpoints, so his question is this. When you get to Shabbos, you simply exist. And his question is, when you're learning Torah, you're not existing, you're building tremendously. The answer is that on Shabbos and Torah, you're building. When you get to Shabbos, it's not a passive activity in which you gain nothing. There's a tremendous growth on Shabbos. All that you've done during the week achieves its Kedusha on Shabbos. You're building into the soul every Shabbos the capacity to live in a higher world much more than you were the week before. Torah, you're working very hard to construct. But the beauty of it, the tchusha, the sensation, the toda'ah, the consciousness of Torah, is that you're in an activity that is essence in itself. This isn't an activity leading to something else. That's the difference. So both are endpoints, enjoyed because you're in a tachlit, but on the other hand, they're both building, they're both parts of life. That's, by the way, why in Olam Haba it's not static. The Gemara says in Olam Haba, tzaddikim are progressing higher and higher and higher. It's not static. It's always a movement. But it's a movement in proportion to what was built here. If you're privileged to be able to learn more Torah than other people, that's wonderful. If you have any sense, you will emphasize the part of your life that relates to a higher reality than the practical. When you earn a living, if you're only earning a living, you're not doing anything meaningful in itself, not talking about a profession that's a mitzvah. You're doing it to keep your family going. So then you should do it in proportion. Why would you want to spend all your total consciousness doing that? So it's a question of balance. The question is it good for you, allowed and good to walk on Shabbos? It's absolutely fine. If you enjoy walking, you cannot walk out of certain boundaries. The concept is that there's a limitation, and you can't carry things out of boundaries. By the way, fascinating question. You know that one of the 39 activities on Shabbos that is prohibited is moving an object from one domain to another. And the Talmud itself asks that is very weird. When you stitch or write or build, you're creating something. But you move an object from one place to another, you never created anything. And for that reason, it's the last mentioned of the 39 creative activities. But weirdly, it begins the Masechta of Shabbos, and more is devoted to that discussion than almost anything else in two tractates of the Talmud. So the deep question is, why on Shabbos are you not allowed to move an object from one place to another? And the answer is not because it's effort, but because on Shabbos all things have come home. Everything is in its place on Shabbos. When you move an object from one place to another, you're taking it away from where it is. The concept of Shabbos is that everything is in its place. It's come home. Like when you leave this world and you enter a domain where that is the place to be. That's the deep concept of Yitzhak Shabbos.